To understand what victory is, we have to understand first why this war started. I won't use more than my 3 minutes, don't worry. I'm a professor, I'm a scholar, so I have to be guided by the research. The wars in the 21st century start where the borders of the country do not match the borders of the civilization. Let's recall the 18th century. There were lots of wars and conflicts between princes without any valid reason. In the 19th century, we saw wars between empires, while in the 21st century, we see wars between civilizations. In 1991, Ukraine has become the part of a Western civilization, de jure. That's why Ukraine has become the forepost of this civilization. While the Moscow Orthodox civilization or Russian world decided that it was not okay for them and they just wanted to bring us back. Let me ask you, before 2014, were the Crimea and Donbas the part of the Western civilization, Ukrainian civilization? No. The Russian language, Russian press, Russian church, Russian agents, Russian business dominated in those regions, even business. That's why we see this demarcation line between the Western civilization and Moscow Orthodox civilization. That's why we see war there. It's not just because Putin is an idiot and wanted to capture some territories. No, it was absolutely logical. I wrote a book, Anti-Ukrainian, and in this book I wrote that the war was inevitable. By the way, several American and European researchers, even before me, estimated that the war had to start in the 20s. So what is the victory? The victory for me is bringing back of our territories on the condition of Ukrainization and westernization those territories, as well as modernization. There should be free market, no oligarchs, and so on. So this is the prerequisite for us getting these territories back. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. It will become possible as soon as Russian Federation starts collapsing. Then we will have the chance to bring everything back on our own conditions. We won't have the possibility to start the reintegration, because thus we will fight again for Ukrainian world and the Ukrainian market and Western values. I often hear and I feel I'm really angry when I hear that Europe gains some time at the expense of Ukrainians' lives. And maybe it's equal to the statement as if Kiev won time for Venice of Khmelnytsky at the expense of Donbas. Our territory is huge, and that's why this was a physical factor that protected Russia for capturing all the territories within 3 days. So, Alexander, your scenario with the fragmentation of Russian Federation, do you believe that this will happen? And if so, that when? Thank you for your question. Maybe let's come back to the dilemma related to the end of war. There will be 2 stages. Ceasefire at the front line. Complete ceasefire and frontline ceasefire. So this is my scenario, which I described in my book. I think that everything should start with a ceasefire. We do not know, unfortunately, where the enemy is going to stop, and only then there will be victory. And your second question, before I answer it, I will say I do not blame people from Mariupol, from Donetsk and Lugansk. In 1991, both Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea voted for leaving the Soviet Union, and they voted for independent Ukraine. And there was the only legitimate referendum held in those territories. But then our authorities, our governments, all presidents, all prime ministers stayed idle, and they allowed for increased Russification. They allowed for presence of Russian world, Russian business, and Russian intelligence. There was not a single newspaper in the Crimea printed in Ukrainian. There was just one school with Ukrainian language in the Crimea for 3 million people. So it was us who pushed those regions towards the Russian world. And of course, it was not difficult for Putin to get them. He managed to occupy Donbas, Lugansk, and Donetsk region without effort. So it's my remark. That's why I think that without westernization of those regions, we won't be able to win. And now I have words regarding collapse of Russia. Look, a little bit of theory. Democratic power is not possible in Russia. What does it mean to have democracy in Russia? It means that some regime like monarchy or dictatorship collapses, and there is a short period of chaos, which is perceived as democracy by the West. And then the new dictator, new president, or new Tsar takes the power. If we want to ruin Russia, we of course should support democracy in this country. Russia will definitely collapse if it becomes democratic. It's scenario number one. It's the easiest, and we have to sell this scenario to the West. The insane ideas of Sovietologists were a complete disaster in the Soviet Union, and Europe did not think at all of what could be done. But all think tanks dealing with the Soviet Union hired old Russian immigration, those old ladies and gentlemen who supported the Tsar. And even Dzerzhinsky, he was far from the reality. 2 years before his death, he wrote that Russia was moving towards democracy. And he said that the Council of Europe would be in Kiev very soon, and Russia would, and the US and Russia would be welcoming those events. So you see, they were very naive, and it's a full disaster. And then another scenario, we have to support national liberation movements, which are observed in the periphery. So once again, it's the fear of civilizations. In this civilization, we see the elements of the Orthodox faith and Catholic faith, there are elements of even Mandarin civilization. So we have to make Russia separated from Tatarstan and other regions. I don't believe that Russia will, like a mirror, be broken into 1,000 pieces. No, I think that the periphery should be the first to fall off, and then we'll have the chance to bring the democratic president to the power. Then we'll be able to coexist with this state. And I have a certain conclusion. Russians are fools. They cannot understand why Ukraine needs to be part of NATO. If they understand this, they will rescue themselves, and thus they will secure a couple of years of existence for themselves. But unless they understand this, they'll start collapsing within the time limit of 5 to 20 years. Due to the war, Putin lags behind from the West, and the gap is very big, 20 or 30 years if the war persists. You know that Putin celebrates the past. He had a cult of the past, and the peak of this cult is death of Russian civilization. Ukraine did not have any ambassadors in Latin America and African countries because Ukraine was failed state. That's what they knew about us, and they decided that Modi cannot refuse from the cheap energy resources, and Modi also still shakes hands with Putin. And now I'd like to ask you to explain your opinion on the arguments that Ukrainian business community could share their colleagues with other countries. Oh, let me share my experience. I'm the rector of the International Business Institute. We are among the 400 best business schools across the globe. I'm not boasting, of course, but I often have meetings, I participate in various fora and conferences where various countries are present, and I have the largest discussions with the Chinese, for instance. I try to convince them, and there are also the Indians and the representatives of other nations. I fully agree with you. Information war is highly important, and the state is unable of winning it on our own. Moreover, the trips of our MPs are perceived rather negative because people in Europe and in the US hate the establishment, regardless of the origin. American, Ukrainian, European MPs, they are just hated, and the situation is the same everywhere. That's why horizontal ties are everything for Ukraine. We have become the epicenter for this civilizational war. And as a result, we have become the leader in this world, and we perceive ourselves as leaders. Just watch Zelensky. His behavior and his conduct is very typical for leaders. Because the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian armed forces behind him, and they show everyone who is who in this territory. Let's say I write the post or I create a video, then I translate it and I send to the ambassadors from the G7 countries and my friends from the US. If the idea is simple and correct, it will have long life, and vice versa. The simple idea, reduction of the oil prices. Slowly, this idea reached Biden, and finally he said, it's a good idea. And then there was an idea to use the frozen assets for funding our armed forces. And this is happening right now. The 23rd of October is the crucial point. If the European Union manages to make this decision, I will call Putin idiot, because then the funds of the Russian Federation will be used to buy weapons from Europe, thus funding our victory. This will be a blow to his reputation. And what else am I doing? I write books, and this is one of my books, and it's being translated in English. It will be published in the Great Britain. And there is a certain idea. There is an idea of the world where Ukraine is victorious. For me, the victory will be then when Russia is kicked out of the Security Council. And it's not a totally unrealistic situation. Just imagine Biden and other global leaders say that Russia is not one of the 5 council members any longer. And we have to sell this to China and to the US. They should voluntarily refuse from being global leaders on their own. We have to say, Comrade C, now you have the rights and the responsibility. You have to take responsibility for your subordinates in the Security Council. And then we have such countries as Japan, Germany, France, Britain, and China. And we have to offer India to become the member of the Security Council. It's the 4th biggest economy. Germany and Japan, of course, should be invited too. Japan is the country which pays the largest contributions to the UN. So we have to engage our allies, and Russia should be kicked out. Economically, it's in the 12th place now. Okay, we got